Alana Marginson. I'm the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning here at the University of Maine at Presque Isle, and I also teach in the College of Education as an adjunct faculty member. And it is my geekiest inner teacher self honor to welcome Sarah Brown Wessling here with us this evening. And one of the things that really resonated for me, and I know that I've talked to some of my colleagues today about some work that Sarah did with our College of Education students this morning. She talked about this notion of teachers being the lead learners in our classrooms. And so I'm thinking about the times that in my department and in my district, how we have used a lot of Sarah's videos for the teaching channel and just her work to really learn about how to be lead learners. And so it is with great excitement that we welcome here to the University of Maine at Presque Isle. Sarah Brown Wessling is a 19-year veteran of the high school English classroom. While a member of the faculty at Johnston High School in Johnston, Iowa, she has taught courses ranging from at-risk to advanced placement and has served the department and district in a variety of leadership roles. Sarah is a national board certified teacher since 2005 and in 2010 was selected as the National Teacher of the Year. In that capacity, she worked as an ambassador for education, giving over 250 talks and workshops in 39 different states as well as internationally. Currently, she maintains a hybrid teaching position, which keeps her in the classroom and allows her to write, speak, and work on teacher leadership initiatives around the country. Sarah is Laureate Emeritus, for the nonprofit Teaching Channel. She is an author of Supporting Students in a Time of Poor Standards and has launched her own blog, Open Teaching, at sarahbrownwessling.com. Please help me welcome Sarah Brown Wessling.
If it's okay, I'm going to stand down here. So, thank you so much. I have to tell you, seriously, you all have been the most gracious, amazing hosts today. It's just been an absolute pleasure. So I really want to spend some time this evening talking about this idea of what it means to let go in the classroom. So much of our teacher selves, I think, are really wired to hang on tightly to things, and so I really want to think about what would happen if we kind of pursued this idea of letting go. So I thought maybe to get started, I would share with you a couple of examples of how I've had to kind of confront this thing that I don't think we naturally really want to do, right? So one of the first times this happened for me, during the year I was the National Teacher of the Year. You're pulled out of the classroom for a year and doing all of this traveling and learning and growing, and it's an interesting thing. I kept getting this question that people would keep asking me. They would ask me what I was going to do the next year, and I said, well, I'm going to go back to the classroom. And they would look at me and they would say, you're going to go back to the classroom? As though I was literally taking a step back or down or something like that. And I started to get really frustrated by this. So finally, I'm in Flagstaff, Arizona in April. And those of you who are readers and literary, teachers, and you will probably know all epiphanies happen on mountaintops and in the rain. So I'm in Flagstaff, Arizona, and it's snowing. So we're going to have one, right? So I'm sitting there, oh, why do I keep getting this question? It's aggravating. And I thought, oh my gosh, I know. I'm not going to go back to my classroom. I'm going to go forward to it. And it's really what has guided me nearly every day since then, is the idea that I had to let go of this idea of going back in order to pay attention to the people in front of me. So this is concretely what happened. So after that, somebody else was in my classroom. So I had to go make it smell good again and look good again. But I also really took this as an opportunity to do some purging, right? So I had the file cabinets, all of the things that I had saved because one day I might possibly need, yeah, you're all nodding your heads, you know what I'm talking about. And so I purged all of this stuff. I actually even hired with like lasagna or something, hired my neighbor who was a sophomore at the time to haul all of this stuff out to the dumpster so I wouldn't have to do it. And then I went to my computer because I was able to kind of, whittle down those file cabinets, but the computer, because that's where all the files are really at. So I went and I bought a jump drive. And I took the folder that said Johnston High School, and I took it off of my hard drive and I put it on the jump drive. And I made a new folder that said Johnston Forward, and it's still the folder that's on my laptop right now. Because this was the other thing that had happened for me during that year. During that year, I had met so many amazing educators, just so many phenomenal educators, that I felt more compelled than ever to become a better teacher. And I knew that I couldn't become a better teacher if I would start every unit, every lesson, right, by saying, what did I do last year? I couldn't go to the folder and say, what did I do last year? So I started to really pay attention to the people in front of me. And it's not that I hadn't done it before, but I did it with a different kind of determination. What can my students tell me? What information are they going to give me? So I will tell you that jump drive is not that far away, because there's some really good stuff on there. But it's just not where I start, right? So that was one of the ways that I had to let go. The other way that I had to let go was this year, actually, and I talked about this a little bit today. This is my 20th year of teaching, and we outgrew our high school. My high school outgrew the one that we were in, so we all packed up and moved to the new one. And in the shuffle, partially because I'm a part-time teacher, I'm the only one who ended up without a classroom. So I had to take, and clearly how much I love my classroom, right? Like, this is my home, away from home, and I had to figure out how to get 19 years of a classroom onto that desk and that cart. So after some emotional turmoil, I actually found it quite liberating, and I really have found it quite liberating. I pay attention to different things. I realized how inside I had been, inside my classroom, just inside this space. And now I'm outside. So I kind of just, in my mind, I thought, you know what? If they're not going to give me a classroom, then I'm going to make any place in this building our classroom. I'm going to make us mobile enough that we can go wherever we want to. So we are on a path to be able, to go wherever we want to. I did have to make this really cool card, and I just want to show you because you understand, right? So I took all my favorite things, right? The things that center me, the things that remind me, the stuff from my very first year that I always have with me, right? And it's just on the card. It's good. It's all good. So there is a lot that comes with letting go, right? A lot of tears on that one. But I've also just seen the possibility. And I think this is part of why we have to let go, because if we don't, we can't see that possibility. It's tough though, right? This is really tough to do. So I thought maybe I could share some images with you. I'm going to ask you to do a little talking to somebody close to you. So here's the question I have for you. What teacher myths are being perpetuated in these images? So a quick rundown of what we're looking at here. At the top we have From To Sir With Love, Dangerous Minds, Lean On Me, The Emperor's Club, lesser known film, Okay, really good short story, Stand and Deliver, Freedom Writers, and then of course Dead Poets Society. All right, so just turn and talk, What do you notice? What teacher myths are being perpetuated here? everyone. I just hate interrupting your talk. It's the worst thing ever, right? Because we know the person doing talking is the person doing the learning. So I'm sorry to interrupt there. But I'm super curious. What did you talk about? What did you notice?
We noticed how engaged the students are on that left
Yeah,
and even Dead Poet Society, that they're just wrapped.
they are. My students, all the time. Right? All the time. Anybody else? What did you notice?
We noticed that in each of the pictures, it kind of depicts the teacher as that sage on the stage
Yeah,
person. They're the center of the
definitely.
whole.
Definitely. If anybody in here is kind of like a photography or a film buff, you probably noticed that these are all shot at what we call a low angle, which means the camera's down here and it's designed to make the subject look really powerful. These happen to be some of the most iconic images from these films, so I think that really supports what you're saying. Anything else you noticed?
Students are engaged.
They're
Somebody already
engaged.
said
Yeah, but we can say that again. 'Cause
But
it's-
I think if you think about what happens when you're thinking about these films is that by the end of the year, they're all engaged and something exciting is happening.
Yeah, and they've all been saved. Is that what you talked about? Martyrs right there. Yeah. And this is the TV version, right? This is the TV version. So let's go to some more images. Here's some different ones. So I'm going to ask you here in a minute to think about the teacher myths that are being dispelled. So let's talk about who's up here. So we have Mr. Rogers, of course, in the top left-hand corner. Top center, James Lipton. Do you know James Lipton? Inside the Actors Studio. Okay, so we got to have like a little timeout here. Okay, so I'm going to give you the backstory. So James Lipton is a dean of acting at a school in Manhattan. He, for his students, does this program called Inside the Actors Studio, where there's a lecture hall, and he brings in a very famous actor, puts them up on stage, has this iconic stack of 400 questions, and then he asks the questions. What's really interesting about his interviews, though, he doesn't interview them about their celebrity. They're not there to promote a film. They're there to talk about their craft. So here's the confession. The confession is that James Lipton probably taught me as much about really good teaching in my first year as anyone other than my students. And here's why. I started binge watching Inside the Actors Studio my first year of teaching. And so I would just be, just like immersed in these interviews and these conversations, and I thought, wow, this is really amazing. Nobody really does this quite the same way, and they all get to this really wonderful place in very different ways. And then I would go to professional development, and somebody would give me a piece of paper, and they would say something like, if you could just follow these steps, then your students will learn. If you could just use this strategy, it'll get better, right? And I realized that there was this real disconnect between what I was seeing that these amazing actors were doing, which was letting go of a script, and what I was being taught to do, which was hang tightly to one. So it took me, I knew this, I didn't really know what it would mean to teach differently, right? That took some years to figure out. But I knew that I had to figure out the difference between those two, right? So that's why he's really important to me. He doesn't know this. All right, so Mr. Rogers, James Lipton, of course, Julia Child, right? In the middle, you can't see the teacher figure. It's Adam Levine's, the back of his head from The Voice. Down here is the legendary basketball coach, Pat Summitt, and then from one of my all-time favorite documentaries called Euro Dreams of Sushi. It's about a Japanese sushi master, okay? So here's the new question. What teacher myths are being dispelled? Okay, turn and talk. Right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What'd you talk about this time? You didn't think you were gonna have to like actually talk and do
Well, I started with Pat Summit because growing up, I watched her coach a lot, and I noticed that she always brought players who maybe weren't the all-stars, but she made them into all-stars. She expected more from them. And Ms. Ladner mentioned Mr. Rogers did the same with kindness.
Yeah.
So we kind of noticed that everyone on there was making the people around them better,
Absolutely.
forcing them to be their best self.
Absolutely. Nice, thank you. What else did you notice?
Well, that's what we talked about too, almost the same thing, that the ones we knew who they were. We're bringing out what was there in the learner and not dispelling knowledge onto them.
Right. Definitely, definitely. Thomas?
The teachers were as much teachers as they were learners. They were all together in class.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's actually also representative by the kind of shot this is. So this is what we call an eye level shot. So there's no hierarchy here, right? And I think to your point, all of these people actually practice what they teach. So Adam Levine does, trying to say, no, he's, what about Julia Child? What do we love about her?
She made mistakes.
Everything. Everything, yeah.
Well, she made mistakes.
I know.
She just said, "Oh, never mind."
They were glorious, right? Like you wanted her to make the mistake. Yeah. But she was practicing it. Yeah. So I think this reminds us that we don't just need people who can turn pages or follow scripts, right? If we're going to teach art, we have to be artists. If we're going to teach history, we have to be historians. If we're going to teach science, we have to be scientists. And that's what they remind us. Right? I think that's where that relationship comes from. And it's very authentic. It's very authentic. And it's not one person telling another person, right? It's nudging. Right? We're going to do this together. I'm going to nudge you in this direction and nudge you in that direction. And when it gets really complicated or you get stuck, it's going to be okay because I've been there too. And because I have been there, I know how to help you get unstuck. Right? So I think it's important for us to just kind of use this as part of our framework for tonight. When I get to work with teachers, and this especially happens when I'm close to home, sometimes people will say things like, Sarah, I'll do whatever you want me to do, but can you just tell me exactly what that is, right? Yeah, we've all said it, right? We've all said it. But it actually opens up this opportunity for me to have, I think, a nice little discussion about what that would elicit. So I could tell you exactly what to do, but if I did, the best you're ever going to get is a pink by number, because that's not where masterpieces come from. Right? Masterpieces require really messy hands. That's where uncommon teaching comes from. If you came into my classroom, you might think it would look a little bit like that. Right? It's a little scattered all over the place. A little bit like the Jackson Pollock. But I think we also have to remember kind of the magic, right, of Jackson Pollock. That what may appear chaotic is deliberate, precise, and carefully designed. There is a difference between this and being whimsical, right? You can have this and be really, really deliberate about it, which is not the same as just kind of showing up. So I have 3 of my own children. I have a 13-year-old, an 11-year-old, and an almost 8-year-old. And oftentimes I rely on them to kind of teach me about the most important lessons in this work. So a few years ago, my daughter, she's my middle child, it was a Saturday afternoon, and she asked me if I wanted to play school with her. And I said yes, because you have to understand, I had been waiting for my daughter to ask me to play school with her. And I said, yes, we're gonna do this, finally. And I said, Lauren, like, how do we play school? And she said, well, you can be the teacher and I'll be the student. And I said, okay, I can do that. I said, but what does the teacher do? She said, well, you can give me something to do and I'll go sit at my desk and do it. And then I'll bring it back to you and you can tell me if I did a good job. And then you can give me something else to do and I'll go sit at my desk and do it. And I'll bring it back to you and you can tell me if I did a good job. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've got the cutest kid ever, right? Until about 10 seconds later when I was entirely mortified. Because I thought, is this what my daughter thinks I do all day? Does she think that I hand out papers and pick them up? And tell kids that they were good or bad or right or wrong? That's playing the game of school. It's not teaching, it's not learning. We have to transcend the game of school. We have to get above it, outside of it, away from it, whatever that might be, right? Our kids really need us to do that. So I thought I'd share with you a couple images from our classroom. Yeah, so these are, in a lot of ways, representations of my ongoing effort to let go, right? So up here in the top left-hand corner, sometimes we rescue the books at the library that I think they're, you can buy them for 25 cents because they're gonna go away. So we rescue them and then we tear out the pages and make found poems out of them. Sometimes I photocopy pages in books that we're reading, and instead of giving a quiz, I ask them to write a poem with the words on the page that demonstrates what they understand about what we've read. Up at the top here, I'm going to tell you about Ben later, but I oftentimes don't give traditional final exams, and that happened to be a year when I decided I had almost all seniors in this particular class, and so the final exam was for everybody to give a commencement address. Over here, I'm a high school English teacher, right? So these are what the examples are. We do poetry, and every time I say the word poetry, it's just groan, right? And so I decided we needed to have a new relationship with poetry. So we created this throw poetry into the universe experience, and kids had to acquire 100 points of throwing poetry into the universe over the course of April, which is National Poetry Month. And so for 1 point, you could post a line of poetry on your Twitter feed, or put a post-it note of poetry somewhere. And then for 25 points, you could do a public act of poetry, right? So all these different things you could do. So we get to this day, the day that it's all due, and it's really fun because we had been keeping track of it on Twitter actually. So every time you threw poetry into the universe, you had to take a picture of it or tweet about it, and so we could follow it. This is a school in Wisconsin who found out that we were doing this and wanted to have a throw poetry into the universe throwdown. So one of my students was kind of an angry slam poet, so he wrote this poem called Get At Me, Wisconsin. We're all friends now. But anyway, so on the last day, I come in and these kids are so excited, right? They have these videos, and they had gone to the mall and done these flash poetry readings at the mall. I was like, are you kidding me? What? This has really worked. And then I realized, oh, you're my procrastinators. The only way you get 100 points is if you go to the mall last night and do that. But they still did it, right? So down here, this is just transferring the things that we read. So we know that transfer is that outward expression of learning. So instead of giving a quiz over a short story, turn it into 4 storyboards, right? And then I just have to tell you about this. So this was maybe one of the best days of teaching I've ever had. So I have this class of kids, I have them for a whole year, and they keep wanting to have a party. They keep saying, can we have a party? We're gonna have a party. They're like, come on, please have a party. I'm like, no, we're not having a party. So then probably about 2/3 of the way through the year, I just was worn out, right? They wore me down. And I said, fine, we can have a party, but it has to be a Wessling party, a Wessling kind of party. And they looked at each other, and they looked back at me, and they said, well, do we get food? Yeah? That's all we wanted in the first place. Okay. So anyway, we created this idea that we would have a literary character dinner party, which is a lot like a murder mystery without the murder or the mystery. But anyway, so teams, we blocked our class periods, so we got a day, or a morning, so we got a whole morning to do this. And the kids were in teams, and each team took a different novel that we had read. They became the characters. And it was really fun. So lots of unpredictable things that they had to do. It ended up being great. They had to take selfies, but when they took the selfie, one of them had to be with the character most opposite of them. Then they had to do one that was really representative of something, right? They could figure out what that meant. When they walked in, I gave them all 4 really obscure lines of text from that year, and they had to somehow weave it into their conversation. And then I told them that sometimes at dinner parties, secrets come out. So I set up this confessional booth right outside the classroom, and at some point they had to just like gracefully slip out and like confess their character's deepest, darkest secret into the confession booth, and then we got to watch them all. So it was a really wonderful day. But I will tell you that most of my wonderful days start with me being really, really nervous and really, really scared that it's not going to go well, that this is going to blow up in my face, I might get in trouble, like it just might not be okay. But I also have realized that is where my best days come from, right? Not the days that I hold on really tight, right? It's the days that I let go. There's Zach, he's talking a little bit. All right. So I kind of want to think about this. Even though we're letting go, there's some things we have to hang on to too, right? So that's part of the equation. You can't just let go of everything. You got to hang on to some things. So about this time last year, I decided that I would be a junior in high school for a day. So I got a substitute and got permission from the principal, and I was a junior for the whole day. I had somebody else come up with the schedule for me. One of the instructional coaches came up with the schedule. I parked in the student parking lot. I was late to every class. My iPad ran out of charge after 3 class periods. I went to lunch. And I dressed up for PE, like all of that, trying to play basketball. And I went to eat lunch, and I sat at the wrong table. There's all this social capital around the lunch tables. I didn't know where I was. I just sat somewhere. I thought everybody will be nice, right? So finally one of my students came over and rescued me and said, nobody's going to sit by you because you sat at somebody else's table. So now they're not sitting there and nobody else is going to sit there. So you should just come with us. And a lot of things that I could have predicted about that day came true, right? All of those things I just said minus lunch. And I was tired. I was blown away by how much their brains had to switch, how much my brain had to switch from class period to class period. I was just exhausted. But there was one thing that I did not count on. I did not count on being angry at the end of the day. I got to the end of the day and I was surly. What? I was just really, and I thought, where is this coming from? And I realized it was because I had been told what to do all day long. Like at no point in my day did I get to create something. Did I get to control anything, right? And really wonderful, nice people. And I would go to one class, here's what we're gonna do today. Here's what we're gonna do today. Here's what we're going to do today. And it really wasn't, there was a break in that. It was during 6th hour, which is like 1:37 in the afternoon. And I was in a money management class, and the teacher started the class differently. Instead of saying, this is what we're going to do today, she said, I want you all to turn and talk to somebody close to you about whether or not you use a credit union or a bank, and if you know why. And I was like, oh my gosh, she asked me something about my life. Isn't that wonderful? And so we turned and talked, and I was in, right? I was like, I wanted to be in money management all day long. Because she just started differently. Her first move was for us to connect to the content, for us to connect to each other, for us to connect to her. So some of this is not big, huge, overwhelming changes, right? These are the small, littlest things that we can change in a day that I think can really leverage into some really important relationships with kids. I don't know if you know this book or not. It's really interesting. It's called How We Learn. So when we're thinking about what to hang on to, sometimes I think about this book. there's a wonderful chapter in here where Benedict Carey, he looks at a bunch of different brain research, and he talks about how we actually learn, and he cites these studies. There are several of them that are very similar, and it essentially is, like, one of them is, there are these people in this control group, or in this group, and they are trying to hit a target, kind of like a beanbag toss, right? They're trying to hit a target. And there's one group that stands exactly where they're going to be assessed from, at the exact angle, and they practice just that one thing over and over and over again. There's another group that gets moved. Every time that they practice, sometimes they have to practice really close, sometimes they have to practice really far away, sometimes off to the side. And so what happens is the group that practiced the way that they were going to be assessed, very quickly they got good, right? So very, very quickly. But then they plateaued, also just about as quickly. So the other group, however, when it came time for the actual assessment, entirely outperformed the first one. Because what they had learned to do was how to account for something unpredictable. They had learned a skill, not just a rote, right, muscle memory action. So when I think about what we hang on to, I do think we have to think about this idea. Are we just practicing over and over the way that we're going to assess kids? Or are we giving them lots of experiences so that they get really familiar with the unpredictable? And I think if we can do that, they learn to own their own skills. They learn to own that content in different ways. I think far too often we think about the thing instead of the process, right? We're looking for the magic pixie dust, or the silver bullet, or the panacea, whatever you want to call it. So I would suggest that maybe we could picture classrooms that look a little bit differently, right? So maybe we could see less of teachers lecturing, more of teachers modeling. Maybe we could see less of students sitting and listening, more of students constructing meaning together. Less of teachers turning textbook pages, more of teachers formatively assessing for direction. And I'll just pause to say that I'd like formatively assessing as a verb instead of a noun, because usually when we start talking about formative assessments as things, they probably are summative, right? You can make a lot of tiny summative assessments. Formatively assessing is a process, right? It's not a thing that you do, it's a way that you teach. Less of students recalling, more of students transferring learning to new experiences, less of students reading from secondary sources like textbooks, more of students wrestling with primary texts, right? So sometimes I think it's helpful to think of just a little less of this, just a little more of that, so we don't feel like you have to change everything, right? Just a little less, a little more. So what do teachers who let go actually look like? So about 2 years ago, it was September 17th, 2 years. I remember this day very precisely. I came home from school. I was going to go have dinner with some friends, and I decided to drop my computer off at home first. So it's about 4:30 in the afternoon, and I open my garage, and I look up, and it looks like the beams in my garage are wet. I was like, that's really bizarre. What's that all about? So I walk in the door, and I walk into, it looked like it was raining in my house. Like there were inches of water on the floor. The ceiling was already falling down in the kitchen. So on my second floor, just in one of the bathrooms, one of the pipes detached. And it was a main one, and it had just been running all day. I know, it was one of the more traumatic experiences in my life. Lost the house, and the kids and I lived in a hotel for a while, and lived in an apartment for a while, and it was fine. There were some moments that weren't, but overall it was fine. You know, I gained so much empathy. Okay, can I just tell you what I really will never ever do again after this experience? I will never assign a project to my students if I do not have the materials in the classroom. Because I was in this apartment, and my son comes home and he has a science project due tomorrow. I don't have scissors, I don't have glue, I don't, I mean, I'm resourceful and I can go get them, but it's 9 o'clock at night and then we're up until 11 and you know what I'm saying? Like, I will never do that again. Like, if I can't provide the stuff, then it's not worth it, right? So, anyway, at some point on the way back in the house, I had to go through every single item in the house, right? I had to decide what's salvageable, what isn't. And we lost about 80% of the stuff. But when it's just stuff, I had read this really great book about Japanese minimalism. And so I was really ready to, you know, like tackle this. But of all the things that survived, there was a tub of paper, right? The irony. And so I opened it up, and in this tub is this binder. And it has, it's a 3-ring binder, I'm not kidding you, 8-inch spine. You know how big that is? I don't even think they make those things anymore. And I thought, what do you have, Sarah? What is this thing? So I opened it up and I thought, oh, I know exactly what this is. This was from the semester before I student taught and the semester of my student teaching, when I thought that if I photocopied every strategy I could get my hands on, and if I could put them in plastic page protectors, and then put like really pretty, colorful, organized tabs along the side, that would make me a really good teacher, right? Because the strategies do it. So, and of course I had not opened up this thing in all of these years. But it does remind me that instead of just accumulating strategies, what we really need is to become strategic with just a few. So if you came into my classroom, I bet you would say, does she just do anything different? Because I pretty much teach all the classes, you know, variations of the same 10 strategies. You know, lots of variations, but basically the same ones over and over again. And so it's important for us to remember that a strategy never does the teaching. It's always a person. Right? People teach, not things. So I also have had a chance to work with the teaching channel quite a bit. And if you don't know about the teaching channel, you should get online and look them up. They go around the country and they film teachers in their classrooms and make these videos available for anybody to watch and see, which is wonderful because so much of this profession has been isolated, and this is, you know, a step into opening up those doors. So they were in the classroom and filming, and this one day I happened to be teaching analysis. But when I teach analysis, sometimes I use these things called the pattern folders. And essentially what they are is they're just manila folders. We take library pockets and glue them inside the manila folder. And then as students are reading a book or a novel, they look for patterns. So they choose, I'm going to look for all the examples of hope. I'm going to look for all the examples of fear. And then as they see them, they write on these little index cards, here's the quote, here's what I'm thinking about, put it in these little pockets, and then when it comes time to, you know, do anything with that whole book, they've got all of this work already done. Okay? So we do that. And they make a little video about that. Great. So I start getting some phone calls from teachers, and I start having these discussions. I'm even like Skyping into some classrooms when teachers are working on doing this pattern folder thing. And there's this conversation that we started to have that I just had to share with you. It went something like this. Hey Sarah, we really like that pattern folder. Can we ask you some questions? Yeah, sure. What can I help you with? Well, our first question is, how many pockets go in the pattern folder? I said, well, I don't know. We usually have a range, 4 to 6, something like that. Oh, but how many would you suggest? I said, I had probably a range, 4 to 6. I don't know, some kids abandon them. Okay, well, here's the deal. Everybody in our grade level is going to do the pattern folder, so we need to do it just the same way. Oh, so then here comes the next question. So, how many cards go in those pockets? And I'd say, well, some kids have 10 cards in one pocket, some kind of space it out evenly. I don't really know. There's not really a number, it's really more about their thinking. Oh, well, do you think you could give us a number? Because we have to write a rubric on this. And if we're gonna write a rubric on this, we need to know how many cards go in there, right? We never really talked about analysis. And I can tell you this story because I know we have We've been in this conversation, right? I've been in that conversation where I get confused about what goes on the rubric. Because what doesn't go on the rubric is anything related to completing the task. What goes on the rubric is the skill. The only things that should be on that rubric are things related to their thinking, right? What was the depth of analysis? Did they draw conclusions? It doesn't matter if it took you 10 cards or 50 cards, right? If you got there, you got there. If you didn't, you didn't. So it's important for us to think about that, right? The difference between this version of that story, which is all about the, the strategy, and this version of the story, which is the one I wanted to tell, which is the conversation I had with Tommy about his thinking. So I was wondering if we could do this real quick. If I gave you 60 seconds, do you think you could take out your phones and like take the best selfie you possibly can in 60 seconds? Can you think you can do it?
Not likely.
Do you think you can try? You can try? Okay, I'm giving you 60 seconds. Okay, go.
That means Lois will be behind me in my you guys take it off. I'll share it with you later.
Okay, ready? About 10 seconds. They're doing it.
Oh, cool.
Are they amazing?
Oh, yeah.
Yes? Beautiful? Yes? He's like, yeah.
So amazing.
So can I ask you a couple questions about this? Okay, so number one, how many of you adjusted the phone at all before you actually took the picture? Like, put it up
Oh,
here?
yeah. Yes.
Did you do that? Yeah? Or what? Okay, how many of you adjusted your faces? Like you looked and you're like, smile. Oh, that's weird. Let me try something.
Apparently I didn't do that.
All right, so here's the real test. If you were going to share this, how many of you would filter it first?
Oh, yeah.
For sure, right? Right? So this is my question. If you think about all of the ways you are willing to be strategic in 60 seconds to take a better selfie, what are all of the ways you are willing to be strategic in classrooms? And the tool is the same, actually. You can take that phone and put it in your classroom and push record and see what you see, right? So video has actually been part of my teaching practice as long as I have been teaching. I remember when I first was student teaching, I would check out those, do you remember those video cameras that would, like, they were big on your shoulder, some of you don't remember these. Right? And so I would check those out and I would use that and I would watch myself. And at first I would just say things like, oh, I don't really sound like that. I don't really sound like that. That's not for real. Or I would be really hard on myself for little things like how many ums I would say, right? And then eventually, I also used it when I did my national boards, I used it in all of these different capacities. And that camera has become really crucial to me. I feel more accountable to it than I really feel to anything other than my students themselves, because it doesn't lie. And it's not that I ever lied to myself about the classroom, but I do have this filter. And sometimes I do get really busy and I think, I taught that really well. What was going on? What was the problem? And then I'll just go back and I'll just look at that 5 minutes or that 10 minutes and I'll think, oh, maybe it wasn't quite what I thought, right? Or I thought that I had talked to every group in the classroom and then I realized it was really just 2. One of them had monopolized almost the whole class period and the other ones I just kind of quickly checked in with. So I just have an old camera. It's just an old phone and it just sits in the back of the classroom. And I don't do it every day, but a lot of times I just say, hey, somebody push play or push record. And it's just a way for me to just pause and really get honest with myself about my practice, right? So not hooked to evaluation or anything like that. So I just offer that as a way you might think, right? And there are other ways too, but that might be one that you can kind of do on your own. And if you do, I think you can remember that this is about seeds and not storms. So this is not about being hard on yourself. This is about what little seed can I take from this strategic practice that might help me think differently tomorrow, right? That's really all that it is. So I want to talk a little bit about what this can look like for students. I think for students, there is a big difference between what I call the surface curriculum and the real curriculum, which is the one we say and then the one we practice. So probably the best way for me to kind of illustrate this for you is to bring you into our classroom on the first day. So the first day of school is about the only predictable day of the year for me. Students, and we do the same thing every year. Students come in, I take attendance, I have them push the desks back into the corners of the room. I hand out a copy of Plato's Allegory of the Cave. We sit in a circle on the floor. I light a candle. They look at me funny. I tell them it's going to be okay. And I read it out loud to them. And we talk through it as we're going. And I give them one question. Can you tell me by the end of class today what this class is all about? From reading this essay. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's about these people who have been prisoners in this cave, and their whole lives they've been chained to one side of the cave. And so there's been some light, but it's really been, the light's been behind them, and so all they've seen their whole lives are shadows that are kind of dancing along the wall. One person leaves the cave, goes into the light, and then realizes, oh, those are shadows, that's not really light, comes back in, and then they're really angry at him, right? Kind of want to kill him. Because it's really threatening that he must be lying. You mean to tell us everything we've known is not true? And so we have this experience, and this is why it's so important to me. Because I've done it the other way, right? Where I have written a really beautiful syllabus. It's really and it says all the right things, right? I talk about how much I value their voices, how much mutual respect there's going to be, you know, and then I stand in the front of the room and I talk at them for 48 minutes. I don't hear a voice. I don't exhibit any mutual respect. I just tell them what's important to me. And this is what I know. They will walk out of that room not remembering a word I said, but they will know exactly how they felt. And that's the difference between the surface curriculum and the real one. We have to give our kids experiences. That's what they remember. They will remember how they felt. And that will help them learn, right? So when they know they're in a safe place, when they know they're in a place where they're not going to be judged or get embarrassed, their minds will be open. Right? They're going to be able to do that learning. So I think that's part of it. I told you earlier I was going to tell you about Ben, and I think this is also an example of what it looks like for students when teachers let go. So I mentioned the commencement speeches. So we had this, this challenge, right? Give a commencement address. When I gave this assignment, I did not give them like a list of requirements. I didn't tell them how many points it was worth, anything like that. Instead, I gave them one caveat: it cannot be cliche. That's it. That's the one thing. And then we watched a bunch of really bad ones, which was fun. And then we studied some really brilliant ones, and that was really cool. And they figured out what was in between them, right? So we end up having this, and again, it all starts because I'm worried, I'm nervous, it's gonna all blow up in my face, my colleagues are gonna get upset because I'm not giving the traditional exam. But we end up having this glorious week, right? Where every kid gets up and tells the story, and they end up doing everything I needed them to do anyway, right? They used examples, they referenced texts, they used narrative, they made arguments, like all of the stuff. So Ben stands up to give his, and Ben had joined our class about a third of the way through the school year, so he wasn't there for the first 9 weeks or so, or a little bit more than that. And he gets up and he says, "So I know that most of you don't know my story, but I have decided that today is the day that I'm going to tell it." So he tells us his story. I'll kind of give you the background. The background is that Ben was a really, really good hockey player at a really, really young age. So when he was a freshman in high school, he moved away, went to Colorado, so that by himself, so that he could potentially play professional hockey. Right? His junior year, he came home in the fall for a visit for a break, and he was on an ATV and had an accident, and nearly severed his arm. It was hanging on by a ligament. He was about 15 minutes away from losing his life, but he made it. And then Ben rehabbed, you know, and then at the beginning of his senior year, he went back to Colorado because Ben is a hockey player, and this is what Ben's going to do with his life, right? He's going to play hockey, and he had to go do on his own what I think the people who loved him the most knew he would have to find out on his own, which was that even though he was good, his arm was never going to work quite the way that it had. And so he came home. And when he came home, his sister, I had had his sister 7 years prior to that, and she said, "Just go to that class, just go." And he's like, "I don't want to go to class, just go." And so he came. And so this is kind of where he picks up on the speak. So he had told me, he kind of gave us this whole background. And then he said, he stopped looking at me. So I don't know if you've given speeches before, or you've been in classrooms when students give speeches and they're constantly looking at the teacher. They just want you to nod. It's like, just keep going, yeah, just keep going. He stopped looking at me and he just looked at the other kids in the class and he said, "No, when I came to this class," he said, "I was really nervous because you all used words that I didn't know. And I didn't know if I could keep up. I didn't know if I'd have anything to say." He said, "But you were so nice to me. And you taught me the things that you didn't know. And then I realized I had some things to teach you." And he said, "What I have realized this year is that my arm is never going to work the way that I thought it would, but I have a brain that does." And he looked at them and he thanked them. And there was seriously not a dry eye in that room, right? He walked out of the, eventually he walked out of the classroom. I went to the phone, grabbed it, called his mom. Said, "You cannot believe what your son just did." Ben's in the process of writing his story in book form. And I share that with you because there's a lot of letting go, right? There's a lot of letting go in that story. There's me letting go of a final exam. There's him letting go of his fear. There's the students being able to hear that, right? To hold that story for him. There's just all kinds of that. And I think that when we hold so tightly, we just don't necessarily make room for those moments. And they don't happen very often, right? They don't happen very often. But when they do, it always makes it feel really worth it. So I kind of want to think a little bit about the cultures that we have to have in order to nurture that kind of work. And for me, that culture comes down to failure. I think that failure is the bridge to success. I think without failure, we don't have success. And so one of my all-time great idols has some really important insight about this. Did you hear that one? Have most of you heard that before? It doesn't, I still like to listen to it. Yeah. So I think it's so important, right, what he's reminding us, that, success on the surface only happens because of so much of that failure. I had a chance several years ago to spend some time at IDEO. I don't know if you've heard of this organization's company. They're super cool. You should just look them up because they're awesome. They have a few hubs around the country, and they essentially solve problems. That's really what they do. They solve people's problems. big problems, big, naughty, wicked, tough problems, like we need to rebrand our hospital. Okay, we might take that on as a project. Or, hey, we're a consumer company and we want to build a better bike. Okay, we can take on that project, right? So they just take on these things, and they're actually starting to take on some education projects, which has been really interesting. But anyway, so as I was there, I got to kind of tour their space and watch them work. It was really interesting. They had this poster because they were having this Permission to Fail conference. So that was the title of their conference. And it really hit home when I was talking with one of the engineers in the workshop who was actually working on a bike. And he said, Sarah, we plan on about 90 failed prototypes before we get a good one, before we get the one that we're going to give our client. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then I thought, not only does that just blow my mind, but that is exactly the opposite of what we do in education. Like, we do everything we can to prevent failure. We write rubrics, we make lists, we put boxes to check off, right? Every single thing so you get it right on the first time. But I think what happens is that when we preclude failure, we preclude learning. So every time they made a new prototype, it iterated, right? They learned something from one that created the next better one. It didn't have to be, this one wasn't good and this one is a good one. It's not even a dichotomy like that. It's just, let's make it a little bit better. Or maybe not, and then we'll jump ahead. So when I was there, they just really reminded me of one of my mantras about teaching and learning, which is that I am more afraid of my mediocrity than I am of my mistakes. I know that as soon, I'm going to keep making mistakes whether I like it or not, so as soon as I stop owning them, I'm going to stop growing, right? That I know will happen. So I had a chance to do this in front of a lot of people. I mentioned earlier working with the teaching channel, so I was their teacher laureate for about 5 years, and they would come to the classroom and do all these films. And they were there one day, they were there for a 2-day shoot, and they'd already been there maybe 8 or 9 different days. And at the end of the first day, one of the cameramen says to me, you know, Sarah, knock on wood, we haven't had a bad lesson yet. And I think when you say something superstitious like that, you're supposed to follow through. Because as luck would have it, or superstition wouldn't, the next day I'm teaching this lesson to my sophomores, and it is just a train wreck. It is just a disaster. So I thought you would like to see just a little bit of a disaster. I'm going to show you a little bit of it. The goal for today's class was to get students prepared to begin writing a literary analysis paper over the Crucible, in which they would examine the role of losing or preserving one's reputation, and in addition to that, look at including some additional resources in that literary analysis. There you go. In retrospect, I can see how the packet of materials itself was a little overwhelming. This is huge. It is. No, we're not gonna read it. It'll be okay. It is. I said, okay, we've got 10 minutes to start reading, and they just turn to each other and they start talking. You guys are so not doing this, are you? No, you're really not, are you? Okay. And this is one of these moments where I have a choice in how I react. So I can either kind of go along with my knee-jerk reaction, which is to say, they're not being good students. But another way for me to think about it, and the way that I choose to think about it, is I've done something to make them act like this, because usually they don't. But I don't understand. I don't know what big words and I don't. There are big words in there that you don't understand, like where. And then there was this moment where I realized that I had completely misfired. That's an author. Yeah. What is this? Where? the criteria of what we had talked about earlier in this year. So in thinking about the adults, I compromised the needs of the kids. All right, I will see you later. This was one of those days where I had 2 ILA classes back to back. I have 5 minutes, and I've got to figure out what I'm going to do because I don't want to do that again. The first thing that I did is I remembered that I had heard myself talking too much, and so I put them back in pods because I knew I was going to do something where they were going to have to be more interactive than they were in the first version of it. So what we need to do is get rid of the discussion at the beginning. Still look at the sources. Maybe not look at the sources. Why don't you guys go ahead and sit in your groups. I still wasn't quite sure, and in my mind I kept thinking, all right, I've given them too many complex things. So I'm thinking, all right, what are my big ideas? The impact on reputation, leadership, civil disobedience. They've got to be able to somehow at least see how these ideas connect. Then the next class comes in. I knew that I had to simplify, and I figured that much out in the 5 minutes, but I hadn't figured out the strategy. Even if I'm going to simplify, they still need a visual in order to help them understand kind of these heady ideas. I'm going to have, let's see here, I'm going to have your 2 groups. I'm going to give each of you some paper here. Let's do this. And then as I'm kind of walking, I just think, oh yes, we're going to do this traveling or progressive concept map. As a group, I want you to think of at least 3 or 4 different ways in the Crucible that we see this idea. All right, and you're going to just make one bubble for each one. Got them back into the play. Many of them had their books out. They were thinking not just about John Proctor, but about other characters.
I think him admitting to adultery almost preserves their reputation.
Okay, so then write that down. It's good to have these moments that you can look at and say, well, with more simplified apparatus, we were successful. See you later. The bell is... So it goes on. So the same cameraman at the end of that lesson said, you know, Sarah, I don't think they're going to want to use that one. And I said, oh yes they are, and here are the 3 reasons. He said, number 1, I only agreed to do this work if they filmed what actually happened, good or bad. I said, and in fact, they obviously did use it, and when they uploaded it, when they put it out, within 48 hours it had 30,000 hits. Like, everybody wants to see the car accident, right? The second reason is because you don't get this kind of mistake on camera very often, okay? And the third reason is because somebody has to go first. We don't get better if we pretend like we don't make these mistakes. We're going to get better when we start to talk about them, right? When we tell each other, this is what happened. If you want to see more of the mistake, you can. There is a full 16-minute version of this. There is a 30-minute uncut version of the first lesson and a 30-minute uncut version of the second one. And there's even another version where I put myself as a little person in the corner and replay the whole thing for you. So you can just like watch it to death, okay? But I think that all really does underscore how important failure is, right? And why we do have to talk about it and why we do have to own it. A lot of times people will kind of ask me, do you have some magic, something? Right? Is there, what's the magic? What's the advice you can give me? And really the truth is that I don't have any. And I often tell people if somebody tells you they have something magic, you really shouldn't believe them. You should be pretty skeptical of that. But I do tell them that I remember the day that I knew I would become at least a deliberate teacher. So my very first year of teaching, I had, you know how they say that one's going to be so hard? Actually, my first year was really pretty great. I had a really fuzzy brain the whole time, but other than that, it was really great. My second year of teaching, which was the first year at the school I'm still at right now, was the bad one. It was really, really tough. I had my classes, we couldn't see, it was just bad. So bad that at winter break, I went home and I told my dad, I said, Dad, I don't think I can go back. I don't think I was meant to be a teacher. I think I got it wrong. I don't think this was my work. And he very gently said, well, you know, honey, you did sign a contract. So you're gonna have to finish up the year. And then if that's your decision, that's your decision. And so I realized he was right. And I had a couple weeks with them. We have some time between winter break and then the end of the semester before we restart. And so I did the one thing that I told myself I would always do. And I had started to do as a student teacher. I asked my students to evaluate me. I asked them to give me some feedback. And I gave them like 3, requirements with the feedback. Number 1, you don't have to put your name on it. Number 2, I promise not to look at this until I post your grades. And number 3, will you please be honest? So they did. For the first time all semester, the 17 and 18-year-olds did exactly what I asked them to do. So anyway, I have all these evaluations and I'm sitting at my desk. And I also have to tell you that that first year I was sharing a classroom with another first-year teacher. And she was beautiful and charismatic and everybody loved her, and at Christmas she had all these gifts on her desk and like people were inviting her to their slumber parties. I didn't really want to go to any slumber parties, but I was just staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning writing these really heartfelt comments on their papers, and like she's going, getting the stuff. And so you have to know that part of the story. All right. So I'm sitting at my desk and I start to read the evaluations. And I should have taken them home, but I didn't. I don't know why I didn't. And they were not mean at all, but they were really honest. And I just started to cry, right? It was like the cry that I'd been holding all semester. So I realized that this is happening and this teacher might see it. And what am I gonna do if this woman who intimidates me sees me crying? So I do a really smart thing. I crawl underneath my desk. Because that's a really smart thing. So as I'm there, like feeling like how a little more trapped than I was a few minutes prior to that, the phone is close by, so we still have an actual phone, right? The kind that's attached to the wall. I grab it and I call the most amazing teacher I've ever known, my mom, who was a 4th grade teacher for 30 years. And we had this really nice, kind of short conversation. And at the end of it, she asked me a question, and she meant it very literally, but it just was, there's all kinds of wisdom in it for me. She said, so honey, are you gonna get out from under the desk? And I said, yes. But the thing is, when I said yes to my mom, I said yes to being a teacher. Because that's what this work is. This work is getting out from under the desk over and over and over again. It's having the person to call. It's having the tenacity to do it. So I just want to thank you, because I know you don't get thanked nearly enough for all of the times that you have gotten out of the desk, gotten out from underneath the desk. For those of you who are going to have desks one day, this is a preemptive thank you. Right? For finding the courage to do it. Thank you. We talked about if we could do a little question, answer, conversation thing if you want to. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I'm also good at a little wait time.
I have a question about the lesson that failed.
Yeah.
And it's really about the 5 minutes between the classes. How did you get your mojo back?
That's a great question. So I will also say that I have told Teaching Channel many times that is the best 5 minutes I've ever given them. So really what I did, and I will tell you, at first my brain was frantic. I was flipped out because that is not the first bad lesson that I had taught, but it was the first one with 2 cameras and 3 boom microphones. And so I just, honestly, my brain felt on fire. Like, I just felt like, I've got to figure this out, I've got to figure this out. And then I just said, this is never going to happen if you're thinking like that. So I took a deep breath. And I really asked myself, I said, like, what is the most important thing they have to learn? Because when I was being frantic, I was thinking strategy. I was thinking, what do I know? What do I know? What do I have? What do I have? And then as soon as I stopped and I just asked myself, what do they need to learn? They need to learn those 3 things. Then I was like, okay, so that's the most important part of that equation. And then the strategy thing, like literally, like, as I was walking across the room and buying time by just kind of talking, right? So that's really what happened. I had to focus on the learning, not the task. That's a good question. Anybody else? All right. Well, once again, I really appreciate your time. And thank you so much for having me. You have been amazing and wonderful, and I'm just so grateful.